Hi, I'm Liam, your Palm Bay podcast host.
And I'm his sidekick, Sarah. Welcome to the Palm Bayer podcast, everyone. Today, we're diving into something super important for our city's future, the Charter Review Commission.
That's right, Sarah. The City Council decided to establish a Charter Review Commission back on January 16, 2025. For those who might not know, the city charter is basically Palm Bay's constitution.
And this commission, made up of electors from our city, has the job of reviewing the charter and recommending any additions or deletions. Think of it as a deep dive checkup to make sure our city's foundational document is still working best for all of us. Each council member gets to appoint 2 electors of the city to serve on the CRC.
Exactly. They're scheduled to start their meetings around July or August of 2025, and they'll be looking at the entire city charter. It's a big task, and they have until August 2026 to get any proposed amendments to the Supervisor of Elections.
So, what specific things are on their to-do list? I heard there are some pretty significant topics up for discussion.
You heard right. The agenda is quite comprehensive. They'll be examining the council vacancy appointment process, how we fill spots if a council member can't finish their term.
That's a crucial one. What else?
They're also looking into the requirements to run for office here in Palm Bay, which could impact who can throw their hat in the ring for future elections.
Interesting. I know voting districts have been a topic of conversation in many communities. Is that on their list?
It sure is. Voting districts is another key item for review. Plus, they'll be looking at the supermajority requirements to terminate charter officers. That's about how many council votes it takes to remove certain high-level city officials.
Okay, that's a lot of important governance stuff, but I also heard something about a certain cap.
Ah, yes, the much-discussed 3% cap. One of the big items is the potential removal of the 3% cap. This cap, as folks may know from our reporting at the Palm Bayer, is detailed in Section 6.01 of the City Charter and restricts annual property tax revenue growth.
Right, and that cap can only be exceeded if a supermajority of the city council agrees there's an emergency or critical need. So reviewing its removal is a pretty big deal for the city's financial future.
Definitely. It has implications for everything from city services to infrastructure, especially with Palm Bay's growth. But simply removing it isn't the only option on the table. There's also discussion about potentially amending the 3% cap.
Amending it how?
Well, one of the ideas being explored is to change Palm Bay's 3% cap so that it only applies to the annual increase in assessed value of homestead properties. This would make our local cap mirror the state's Save Our Homes amendment.
So non-homestead properties wouldn't be under that same 3% restriction anymore?
Precisely. Currently, our city charter applies this 3% cap to overall property tax revenue growth. If it were amended to apply only to homestead property assessments, it would remove that citywide revenue constraint. This could potentially allow for greater overall property tax revenue growth, especially from non-homestead properties and new construction, which resets to market value. That
sounds like a significant shift. Would that kind of amendment still trigger issues with existing city contracts, like with the unions?
That's a key question. For instance, the IAF, International Association of Firefighters, contract has a reopener clause that's triggered if the section of the city charter restricting the budget increase to a maximum of 3% over the previous year's budgeted ad valorem revenues is rescinded.
So if it's amended rather than fully rescinded, does that avoid reopening contract negotiations?
It's a bit of a gray area. One argument could be that amending the cap, rather than repealing it entirely, might not trigger that clause, because a 3% cap would technically still exist in the charter, just in a modified form. However, how rescinded is interpreted in that contract is up for legal interpretation or negotiation. So it's uncertain if amending the cap this way would definitively avoid reopening those contracts. It's one of the complexities the Charter Review Commission will need to consider.
It definitely sounds like they have a lot to weigh. It's all about finding the right balance for our community. And remember, any proposed changes to the charter that come out of this review will ultimately be submitted to the electors, that's us, the voters, to decide.
Absolutely. And we'll be keeping a close eye on the Charter Review's progress and discussions here at the Palm Bayer podcast, and of course, on the Palm Bayer News platform.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Join us next time on the Palm Bayer Podcast, everyone.
Stay informed, Palm Bay.
In accordance with Florida Sunshine Law, FS 286, published information and opinions are subject to these statutes. While public discussion by any individual is not restricted, Florida statute strictly forbids committee members from discussing such matters amongst themselves outside of a publicly noticed meeting. All official committee deliberations must occur openly.